Hello, this is Kinninigan from RagingReptilian.com. Everyone get their coffee today? Because we're going to be talking about reptilians. Not sure how long this video is going to run, but first things first, because there are some comments I'm going to answer from the last video I uploaded telling you that I was going to be doing this video. A few questions, and they're legitimate questions, and I'll be happy to answer them for you. Are native Terran reptilians shapeshifters? No, they are not. They actually use something called visual mimicry, and that is covered on my channel. If Lisa Neverson, if you just do a search on my channel, you can look up Alpha Draconian reptilians and native Terran reptilians. I've done quite a few videos on the difference between the two. The ones we are talking about today are specifically the native Terran reptilians. Second question I need to answer here is is Mammoth Cave under a cemetery? Actually, Mammoth Cave is the largest cave system in the United States. It's based out of Kentucky, but if you look at a map, the area that we were talking about here, specifically today, encompasses parts of West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. And it's the southeastern part of Ohio that we're specifically talking about, which is called the Zaleski State Forest. Yeah, a lot of these sites that we talk about are quarantined off as quote-unquote national forests. There's a reason why. Secondly, yes, there was another comment that I made a mention about. Was the United States called Turtle Island? This is really important. The entire continent of North America at one time was actually called Turtle Island. And it's right on here on good old Wikipedia. Turtle Island is a name for North America used by many Native Americans and First Nations people and by indigenous rights activists. I never heard indigenous rights activists. Well, so yes. The Serpent Mound in Ohio. In the previous video, I put 3 links to videos there, and they all dealt with reptilian underground bases. The first one is the infamous one we have an actual newspaper article for in 1934 in Los Angeles, where they found an underground, quote-unquote, city of lizard people. A few years later, we get Hollywood built over top of, look at Los Angeles now. You want to know why? Yeah, Los Angeles is built on top of a huge cave system. These ancient cave systems that we're talking about, the ones that connect to Mammoth Cave is theorized to be one of the entrances to Hollow Earth, of all things. I want to read you this sign about the Serpent Mound in Ohio, because when you read this, you really read between the lines on this one. And the original Native Americans that had to do with the building of that quote-unquote Serpent Mound, who at the time the continent was called Turtle Island, are the Adena and the Hopewell Indians specifically. Now, the documents I'm going to be reading. Brian O., very good friend of mine. I've known him for quite a few years. We first met in about 2011. I started becoming a forum conspiracy poster at a site called Disclosed TV, which me and Brian have a long history with. Don't really frequent the website too much. I used to be very active at Disclosed TV. He was also doing some production work with Project Camelot and Kerry Cassidy. I'm sure you've heard of them. The Book of Man series, I'm going to put this link in the description. This is his series that'll more or less tell you the whole entire history of planet Earth, starting back from ancient alien wars all the way up to modern times. It's a long story. And the reptilians do fit into this, the native Terrans and the Alpha Draconians, because what's kind of interesting is we had a nice chat last night again on my Discord, and yes, our research does parallel each other when it comes to the thought of reptilians. So the article I'm going to be reading was originally written by him, I believe, in the 90s. This was revised recently. This link will not be in the description. This is a Microsoft Word document sent to me by Brian O, who wanted me to do this video, and we worked out the specifics on that last night. So I don't have the express permission to release these documents to anyone. They were emailed to me. But we got a few documents here we're going to take a look at. It's not very long. I would call this a dissertation, would be the right word. It's not technically an article, although there's a lot of graphics here. So we'll get some good visual things to look at, including some maps. The Ohio River Valley reptile phenomenon. The theoretical case for nesting and foraging of an unknown reptile species, otherwise known as reptilian. Now, the serpent mound, before I start reading this. I made a mention earlier. The only way you would be able to see that serpent mound is by air, from an aerial view, like the Nazca lines. Yes, that is correct. It is the Nazca lines in Peru, which is very interesting because, as always, modern scientists can't explain that. Why would they be building a symbol of a serpent on the ground that was only visible from the air? Unless that serpent mound is the actual marking for an underground cave system that the native Terrans possibly used. Now, it's my theory, when the Alpha Draconian invasion came on Earth, this is kind of backed up by Lacerda, the female reptilian, in the Lacerda files. They were at war with the Alpha Draconians. The native Terrans don't like the humans, which they say we were created by these invaders. And they fled to the underground, quite possibly the hollow Earth. Yes, I believe the Earth is hollow, and the last video I made on hollow Earth was the lost city of Z in Brazil, of all places, which is another theorized entrance to the hollow Earth. So these Alpha Draconians and native Terrans, they are two distinctly different species. The native Terrans are scaled. They don't have tails. Bipedal creatures don't have the need for a tail. But they are scaly. They can use visual mimicry to make themselves appear human when they're in public. I actually have a video on my YouTube channel of a reptilian doing that. It's on there. The Alpha Draconians, otherwise known as the infamous name the Illuminati, are the ones at the top. They do not live underground. They look like the Skeksis from the Dark Crystal, very vulture-esque looking. Two distinct species. So the native Terrans are more quote-unquote reptilian in nature than the Alpha Draconians, who are actually more bird-like. Although birds and reptiles do have a lot of... Everyone's heard that theory that some dinosaurs turned into birds, and they're finding out now that velociraptors don't look like the raptors from Jurassic Park. They were probably actually covered in feathers and were more bird-like. And now that was brought up by the professor in Jurassic Park. They mocked it in that movie. Then they gave you the big scary reptilian porn with the velociraptors being scaly. No, they look like big chickens. That's actually what they look like. Dinosaurs and birds have a lot in common. So, with that out of the way, I just wanted to clear up the difference between the two reptilian species we're talking about here and Mammoth Cave. And yes, one time, so the history that we're talking about here in the United States, this was actually called Turtle Island. Why and how they came up with that name, I don't know. But when I research ancient mythologies, I look up ancient histories for quote-unquote Turtle Island, because it wasn't called America back then. So next time you're going through immigration, they ask you, where were you born? Tell them Turtle Island. See what they do with immigration at the border on that one. But Turtle Island was the entire continent of North America. So we were split up into Canada, Mexico, South America. You get the idea. So anyway, back to Brian O's dissertation here. I'm going to read this. Final revision, March 31st, 2004, Brian J. Olney, Vero Beach, Florida. Some contents here. Now, the things that we're going to be going through, there's some case reports of quote-unquote reptilian sightings in Ohio that he has in this, and also a little bit of back history about this area and the theorized location of this reptilian city entrance. And on top of that, we have another document he sent me called the Minion Project. Now, what is this? This means we put boots on the ground and go look for this place. I've been telling people my future is documentary filmmaking, just like I did with Area 51. You can't call Kinney a YouTuber sitting at home when I'm sitting on some of the best Area 51 footage on the internet, because I have an employee bus on video, I have multiple UFOs, I possibly encountered an alien hybrid when I was there. I told that story on my channel too. Most people that go to Area 51, like History Channel, they don't show you shit. They go up and they show you the alien inn and maybe some camo guys driving in a white SUV or something, and that's about it. They don't show you the good stuff. The only reason I'm mentioning that is because I got a little bit of historical back history on the United States from the Hopi Indian guide who took me on my Area 51 tour, who confirmed that yes, they did have knowledge of an indigenous reptilian race that was native to this continent, also of Sasquatch, otherwise known as Bigfoot, and the Ant people. And in fact, a lot of the mythology around the Ant people and the Hopi Indians has been pretty well known, especially with the petroglyphs in the southeastern United States. Now, there are cave systems all around the entire planet, actually. There's even theorized a massive one that even goes under the Pacific Ocean, yeah. I think it believes it starts in Mount Shasta, California, and goes out to Easter Island. Yeah, that strange island with the moai statues in the middle of the Pacific Ocean could possibly be another underground cave system entrance. So, these are ancient cave systems. Some of these cave systems are ways to get to the Hollow Earth. We have multiple indigenous stories of this. In fact, that would be an interesting video. There is a story, indigenous story, that comes out of South America, of all places, of elders from a tribe there that used to travel to the Hollow Earth. And they have accounts of it. So, this research from Brian O. and my reptilian knowledge, this goes way before any of that, reptilian was making the mainstream. Back when he originally wrote this in the 90s, I wasn't even a conspiracy theorist yet. I had no in-depth knowledge of reptilians and all that, so it's kind of interesting. Now I can't, I'm in, what is this? Yeah, this is Apache Open Office, which is a open source version of Microsoft Office, because I was sent these files in a Microsoft Word document. Case being, this is not a PDF. I don't think I can increase the text size. Maybe I can. I don't use Open Office that much, but usually I like to increase the size of the text so people can read along with me. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it, but we'll get through this pretty quickly. He wrote Brian O. is obviously a Lord of the Rings fan, and so am I. There are older and fouler things than orcs in the dark places of the earth. Gandalf, Fellowship of the Ring. And yes, I agree with that one. To start things off in the proper perspective, according to the National Geographic Society, the Tennessee-Cumberland watershed encompasses an area of the whole eastern United States across the border into Canada to the north, and includes the Mississippi River to the west, the Great Lakes complex, and sweeps east to the Atlantic Ocean. Now, that is basically the Appalachian Mountains also. Wherever you have mountain ranges, you're going to have caves. No coincidence. One of the things that I mentioned earlier in the video, we originally had 13 colonies in the United States. And what took them so long to basically move across the western part of the United States and, going from the 13 colonies to making it to California, where we got all the gold from? Remember the gold rush? They had to cover up a lot of history of the United States, things they couldn't explain, like the Serpent Mound in Ohio. Okay, how did it get here? Who built it? Why was it built? They found a lot of these burial mounds. They couldn't explain those. A lot of this stuff got hidden by the Smithsonian. I made a mention the other day, whenever you read about explorers discovering new ancient sites or whatever, they are always backed by some British Historical Society, the Smithsonian. These are the people that blackball the real history of what's going on. This is why me and Brian talked about possibly launching an expedition here sometime in the future. I'm not that far away from Ohio and the Serpent Mound. This is a huge ecosystem with wide biodiversity, and for scale's sake reveals the Great Lakes system alone accounts for 18% of the entire world's supply of surface fresh water. The point of that short exercise is to show that not only does the eastern United States hold one of the largest single vaults of fresh water on the planet, but maybe even the most biodiverse and known species, second only to the Amazon River Basin. In addition, that the Ohio River Valley sits smack dab in the middle of a watershed is one of the biggest, largest principal tributaries to this planetary scale ecosystem is no small matter. Historically, for mere humans, freshwater is not just a necessity, but also the center of our, and we must presuppose, other species universe. Yeah, wherever there's life, there needs to be water. Dating as far back as the late 1800s and up to this current period, there has been numerous reports of unusual reptile run-ins throughout the Ohio River Valley, including specifically Kentucky, Ohio, and Indiana. These reports have been covered in the fundamental media either lightly or very briefly. Though there have been, in some cases, differences in both the physical appearance and activity of these reptiles, the most common denominator still remains thus. Heretofore unknown reptiles, some acting in a manner not normally observed in known reptiles, located in areas not well known for reported sizes of these reptiles. All instances reported having leathery or scaly skin. All instances reported having the head or like a lizard or a frog. And all reported instances directly related to the near waterway location. Upon viewing every single case on each account's own merits, one will immediately come to the conclusion that the size and activity of these reptiles is expressly somewhat unusual, and oftentimes these tales have been scientifically written off as wild fantasy or utterly unbelievable, of course. Now, to prove that, look under my video after I upload this. There's probably going to be a Wikipedia link to what reptilian humanoids are, going back to Wikipedia. Some of the mockery going on YouTube right now. The interesting point I make here concerning the totality of these chance events, though, is that all combined they relate directly to some form or forms of reptile, unlike the other potential remote cryptoid mammal or primate encounters. I think that's referring to Bigfoot, could be wrong. He is referring to Bigfoot in that. And all have a distinct relationship and connectivity to the Ohio River Valley, and specifically the Ohio River itself. The fact that many cryptoid reptile confrontations have been reported, at least from the point of view of current Western civilization, since the 1800s in the Ohio River Valley, can only lead one to think that there are more than one or two of these creatures running around out there. Either that, or the one creature has lived a very long time, travels far and wide undetected, and has escaped capture once we know of, and alters its physical shape, size, and behavioral activity at will. Now, I will attempt to show by conclusion of this paper that there may be literally vast numbers of these alleged creatures, and the basis of these encounters are tied to the Ohio River Basin, as well as through common related details that point to a specific location for what can be referred to as either a nest or simply potential points of origin. That is the basic basis for and direction of this study. With the case reports that follow, I will attempt to expand on what I believe is the primary correlation between these events and my individual interpretation of how these events are tied to the obviously Sibylline premise. Regardless of how astounding any of these reports must sound on one's initial read, the basis for this further scrutiny comes from the ultimate finer details, something that inherently gets overlooked in real and bigger picture. In addition, without fine-tuning the carved-in-stone definition of what a reptile physical configuration or behavior is, or should be about, there are specific identities that a causative description of what actually constitute a reptile in general. Example, if it flies like a bird, looks like a bird, has feathers like a bird, it's most likely a bird. That's Occam's razor simplified. Yeah, very good metaphor right there, Brian. I like that. Occam's razor. Haven't heard that one in a while. Though many individuals with much more knowledge than I could ever amass could probably argue against all the points I'm about to make. Not all these points can be dismissed matter-of-factly. Case report subject matter and content aside, the common detail evidence is far more direct than a simple case of whimsy. Any conjecture to forward here will be based solely on the details and combined information of others, and with probably more information at their disposal. That's what I'm here for. This is why he wanted me to read this. That being said, let us embark on that interesting little journey, and maybe someone somewhere will ignite the thinking man's light bulb appropriately. There are, and always will be, possibilities. Case Reports, Part 2. This chapter contains 9 publicly documented cases and the retrospective locations representing the only reported cryptoid reptile concerns in and around the Ohio River Valley. Where duplication of locations occurs, a reference to the corresponding figure will be given. Now, as a side note, actual witness accounts of Alpha Draconian reptilians or the Illuminati always happen in a kind of royal setting with the royal family. You get the idea. Royalty is associated with it. Now, these native Terrans, I think it was, they used to be more public, and then they fled to the underground because they're running from us. They see humans as a threat, and I don't blame them. This is probably why Bigfoot doesn't want to contact us. Go ahead and laugh about it. We're a violent species. We're considered evasive by a lot of these indigenous creatures, including the ant people, Bigfoot, the native Terrans. And all 3 of these species, I believe, are hostile to the native, well, the Alpha Draconian reptilians. So we're in the middle of a war going on here between native species of this planet and an invasive species known as the Illuminati, and we're just in the middle of it. So, Wild Man of the Woods. This excerpt is paraphrased from Lauren Coleman's Curious Encounters. Over 20 years ago, pre-1965, in the back issues of the Louisville, Kentucky Courier Journal, there was an interesting little item in the 24 October 1878 issue. A wild man of the woods was captured, supposedly in Tennessee, and then placed on exhibit in Louisville. The creature was described as being 6 feet 5 inches tall and having eyes twice the normal size. His body was covered in scales. Case number 2, no exact date given, late 1800s, Warren County, Ohio. Brooks detailed several newspaper accounts from the late 1800s from a small town in Warren County, Ohio. On the banks of a small creek near Crosswicks, 2 young boys were fishing when one was attacked and carried off by a quote-unquote snake with legs, which attempted to drag the boy into a hollow tree which was approximately 26 feet in diameter at the base. A trio of men heard the cries and rushed to help, rescuing the boy. The animal disappeared into the large hollow tree. Later that day, a group of 60 men came and began cutting down the tree. the animal jumped from the tree, erected itself to between 12 and 14 feet in height, and raced away on its hind legs. The men described it as from 30 to 40 feet long, 16 inches in diameter, and the legs 4 feet long, covered with scales as the body. Feet about 12 inches long and shaped like a lizard, of black and white color with large yellow spots, head about 16 inches wide with a forked tongue, and its mouth inside deep red. The hind legs appeared to be used to give an erect position, and its propelling power in its tail. Similar tales circulated years later from Shaker Swamp, west of Lebanon, Ohio, but these later were thought to be told to scare away berry pickers. I have not located the original newspaper reports, and it's very possible that this additional report was a newspaper hoax. Yeah, there are some strange accounts. Now, I made a video, of all things, the Snallygaster, which was a German slang for the piazza bird, or what the Native Americans call the thunderbird, which we know was a real creature at one time. Some of these accounts of the Snallygaster were often mistaken as being a quote-unquote dragon. So you got to look into the accounts of these. Anyone that would have saw the Snallygaster back in the day probably would have thought they were looking at a dragon. So I don't know if some of these accounts, because this is around the time when the Snallygaster sightings were happening in the 1800s. Then it disappeared. I believe this Snallygaster was hunted and killed off, because it's another part of the going to the western part of the United States. It's not going to be very easy to get people to hey, set up shop in the middle of Kansas and build a house there when you got a bird flying around that literally could pick humans up off the ground. And the Snallygaster was known for stealing livestock. So remember, when we first came to the United States, it was 13 colonies on the East Coast, where I am right now. Philadelphia used to be the capital of the United States. And we didn't really venture west. There was too much they had to set up before, they can make that big push westward. And what took them so long? You don't think they wanted that gold in California? Please. Case number 3, 1955, August 21st, near Evansville, Indiana. We're still talking about the whole area that encompasses Mammoth Cave. This is a massive cave system under the Appalachian Mountains. So, Mrs. Darwin Johnson of Goodtown, Indiana, was swimming with her friends, Miss Chris Lamble, about 15 feet from the shore when something grabbed her from under the surface. It felt like a hand, had huge claws and furry or scaly palms. It came up from behind, grabbed her leg, grabbed her knee, and pulled her under. She kicked and fought herself free. It pulled her under again. Although both women could not see the thing, they screamed and yelled at it to scare it away. Finally, Mrs. Johnson lunged for Mrs. Lamble's inner tube, and the loud thump apparently scared it and released its grip. Back on shore, Mrs. Johnson received treatment for her scratches and marks on her leg. 14 investigator Terry Colvin. Now, if you're not familiar, 14 magazine was like a it was a conspiracy magazine that was actually, I believe, I don't know if it's still in publication now, but I know it was pretty in the 90s before YouTube and the internet. Getting quote-unquote conspiracy information was quite difficult, so a lot of these conspiracy theorists would write articles for 14 magazine. I know because I read a Reptilian article from 14 magazine on my channel that was actually originally written in 1996 on the reptilians and their connection with modern human, why we have so much serpent symbolism. It was a fascinating article because it's something I've been telling myself for a while. What is the fascination with reptilians? Why do we, when I mention it to people, they know there's some truth to it, but they don't want to be mocked because they don't want to be the ones, talking about crazy shape-shifting reptilians. But the more people I expose to the conspiracy, the more it catches on, and the more people are actually finding it believable, because we're not being run by humans. I'll tell you that right now, and if you think we are, Coincidentally, Calvin also learned that Johnsons were visited by an individual who identified himself as an Air Force colonel who took voluminous notes and warned not to talk about the incident any further. I would say that was a Men in Black encounter. For anyone who's seen The Creature from the Black Lagoon, good movie, the Ohio River encounter of Miss Darwin Johnson is already familiar, for her attack was foreshadowed in that movie. It's more Hollywood mockery right in your face. For anyone, though some may argue this point, I believe that this event is directly tied to a reptile experience through no actual visualization occurred. In order to grab a human swimming in fairly deep water by her left leg and her knee will require 2 forward arms and hands. The description and the possibility of scaly palms and claws leads one to believe that this was not only intelligent by design, but also quite possibly reptile. For further conjecture on this particular event, I will refer to conclusions made further in Chapter 3. One other small case point, these witnesses were swimming in the Ohio River. 1959, March, Charles Mill Lake, Mansfield, Ohio. A green-eyed, 7-foot-tall, seemingly armless humanoid seen by Michael Lane, Wayne Armstrong, and Denise Patterson came out of the lake and left behind tracks that resembled footwear worn by skin divers. Case number 5, 1963, Charles Mill Lake, Mansfield, Ohio. Luminous and green-eyed creature seen again. I examined the site of these encounters and can testify to the Charles Mill Lake's swampy affinities. Certainly a good home for a Black Lagoon beast. Lauren Coleman. Now, as far as the creature of the Black Lagoon, they kind of remade a movie about this creature, or something that looks like the creature from, and that was made from the director. He made the movie Pan's Labyrinth, and it involves a love story of this reptilian aquatic beast falling in love with a blind woman. I can't remember the name of the movie. I'm not gonna look it up right now. It's a pretty new movie, and that creature looks exactly like the Black Lagoon creature. And supposedly in that movie, they captured that creature in an Amazonian river, which is very interesting because it looks exactly like the creature from the Black Lagoon. Kind of reptilian aquatic looking, doesn't look like a mermaid. And so when I seen that remade and they were using the same exact creature from the Creature of the Black Lagoon, it reminded me of that movie. Case number 6, 1972, March 3rd, Loveland, Ohio. Loveland, Ohio. Sounds like a nice city, right? Northeast of Cincinnati. 2 Ohio police officers both saw what has become known as the Loveland Frogmen. This event was investigated by Ron Schaefer and Richard Mackey, who interviewed both officers, though used fictitious names of Williams and Johnson for the officers to protect their identity. Oh, I just remembered the name of that movie. It's called The Shape of Water. Okay? So if you want to see a good movie about an aquatic, reptilian-looking humanoid, The Shape of Water. Very good movie. And remember, that creature was originally found in an Amazonian river, and he was worshipped as a god by the local Amazonians, according to the mythology in the movie. So they're always mocking stuff right in your face with Hollywood. At 1 a.m. on a clear, cold night, Officer Williams, en route to Loveland via Riverside Road, thought he saw a dog beside the road. When the thing stood up, its eyes illuminated by the car lights, looked at him for an instant, turned and leapt over the guardrail. Williams saw it go down an embankment into the Little Miami River. He described it as weighing 60 pounds, about 3 to 4 feet tall, having a textured, leathery skin and a face like a frog or a lizard. Williams went to the police station and returned with Officer Johnson to look for the evidence. They turned up scrape marks leading down to the side of a small hill near the river. Case number 7, 1972, March 17th, Loveland, Ohio also. 14 days later, Officer Johnson, again driving outside of Loveland, when seeing an animal lying in the middle of the road, stopped to remove what he thought was a dead animal carcass. Instead, when the officer opened his car door, the animal got up in a crouched position. The creature hobbled to the guardrail and lifted its leg over while constantly looking at Johnson. Johnson decided to shoot at it and missed, he believes, because the thing didn't slow down. Johnson later told how he felt was more upright than the way Williams had described it. Now listen, this is very important. Think about, modern American police. They shoot anything that moves. We know that. This is one of the reasons why I was saying that creatures like Bigfoot, the native terrans, they don't want nothing to do with humans. Because, look, you had a police officer try to shoot this reptilian because he didn't know what it was. Can you imagine aliens landing in front of a modern American police station? Go ahead and laugh, but I'm sure the cops will be out there with their AR-15 shooting the UFO up because they'll be scared. They won't know what to do. And then they're going to create a whole international incident with planet Earth because we didn't know what the alien had in its hand. Yeah, go ahead and laugh about it, but that's why these creatures don't want anything to do with humans. We're violent. We're unpredictable. They don't like us. Case number 8. 1972, March, Loveland, Ohio. Also, an area farmer told investigators he saw a large frog-like or lizard-like creature during the same month of the two police officers' sightings. Now, the case files, we have one more. Case number 9. This is in Milton, Kentucky. Clarence Gable reported a giant lizard roaming the forest around his junkyard. Author Peter Gutilla described the creature Gable had surprised as about 15 feet long, had a foot-long forked tongue, and big eyes that bulged something like a frog's. It was dull black with white stripes across the body with quarter-sized speckles all over it. On-site investigator Mark Hall indicated the giant lizard ran bipedally according to other Trimble County, Kentucky witnesses. Whatever this animal was, it certainly was not amphibian. Not only are the characteristics clearly reptile-like, but a large amphibian would quickly dehydrate in the July sun, especially underneath the sun-heated metal of wrecked cars. At present, however, I'm wondering why the description of this creature so closely matches the one seen almost 100 years earlier just across the Ohio River in Warren County, Ohio, case number 2. The coloration given in both reports is almost exactly the same, but the earlier report was a more local tale that was never widely publicized. Now, as a side note, Brian, I'm sure you're going to be listening to this. I am going to do some investigative research to try to see if I can find the original newspaper articles for some of these encounters. And if I can, I will make the videos as I find them and show you the newspaper articles. There's a lot of stuff published in our national archives. It just gets buried, but every newspaper out there that's ever been published in history, including the newspaper article we have about giants, the underground city of reptilians in Los Angeles, they're all kept in the national archives. That's what old school newspaper reporters used to do. They used to go through libraries and look through microfilms. And so if these cases were originally reported to local newspapers, should be able to track them down. And I'm going to see what I can do about that. Now the location detail. This is really, with the case files I just read, we're getting I'm just going to read this. We're getting a location as to where these cases are originating from, and they're all going up and down the Ohio River, just like you said. At this point, it is imperative that we move to probably the most important phase of discussion. What do all these case reports have in common? What do they show us far as some remote source of relational data, and can one draw an objective conclusion from such an exercise? I believe the answer to those questions can be demonstrated, though will require some time and attention, as well as a reasonable understanding of related or obscure information displaying some form of conjunction. What follows is a demonstration that I believe, in the end, will go further to tie all the apparent unrelated events together, something that has not been previously attempted. At Part A, location data. Figure 8 shows the regional position of these cases, including the 3 reports from Loveland area and the 2 reports from Mansfield Charles Mill Lake. I don't know if you can see that on your screen, but there's some dots here of these case files that I was just reading. What the points above lead to is that there seems to be an incredible barrage of encounters directly related to the Ohio River, which delineates the borders of Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio. Of all 9 of these occurrences, 7 of the most profound are directly connected to the Ohio River by only a matter of feet to a very few miles. The only other 2, Charles Mill Lake, can be traced to the Ohio River by a chain of connecting rivers. Though the distance may seem on the surface as very lengthy, 200 miles or so, the parallel remains as noted by red tracking in the next figure. In most people's minds, the distance from the Ohio River proper may seem extraordinary for 200 miles. The fact that there have been 2 documented sightings at that distance can only be questioned from the standpoint that there had been some travel by connecting rivers. If it has been a unique species to that area in particular, and not related whatsoever to any of the other cases, the difficulty of explaining a large, possibly reptoid creature completely outside the realm of other 7 events seems particularly implausible. Section B, Waterway System Data. After studying all the river systems related to the data set, a broader picture appears that tends to lead one to believe that the connection is so definitely river-based and all the event sites are related to the river data, it is difficult to dispel the notion that of the 9 events spanning very close to 100 years, that the river correlation is not related. Figure 10 displays the connectivity of all the occurrences related to the Ohio River Valley and Ohio River and the Ohio River system. And you see that actually runs all the way. It borders West Virginia, Kentucky, Indiana. Like with Pennsylvania, our natural border to New Jersey is the Delaware River. Look at the border between Mexico and the United States. The border is a river. So usually rivers, yeah, it makes sense. This is why it's encompassing a few states here. You kind of understand how this works. With this presupposition comes a small caveat, and that would be that Charles Mill Lake events in the Mansfield area. Given the 200-mile distance from the Ohio River, the immediate argument would come about as to how could any relevant and unusual species travel that distance and not be seen, documented, or even remotely spotted prior to that point. The only answer could be that they truly travel during periods when they cannot be observed, and points to the high probability that this is not a local species. If the species is of a dedicated local environ, then the possibility of the description so far should present radically different visual traces to make it unrelated. The fact that reptilian characteristics were defined by the comment tracks that resembled footwear worn by skin divers is distinctly telling of reptilian tracking prints. Either that, or this was actually skin divers misrepresented in 2 separate public dramas. Follow-up. So let's revisit all 9 of the cases. Number 1, 1878, Louisville, Kentucky. I'm not actually going to read the cases again, but I'm going to reiterate on this because I don't like to make my videos last too long, usually about an hour, but I'm not going to reread the case files. Now, here's where things get interesting. Connectivity to location and waterway data. We have the location points of the case files here. And just to show you again the area that we're talking about. It's a map of Ohio, right here. So we are actually talking in this. Okay, now the Serpent Mound, otherwise known, the Hopewell Indian, or the Indians I was talking about earlier. We have Hopewell culture right here, and Zaleski State Forest, and we have some national parks here. We have Shawnee State Forest. A lot of these cases, including the case files I just read from Bryant, were happening all on this area here at the bottom southeastern, southwestern part of the state. This is also part of the Appalachian Mountain Chain, which obviously I said, which is why there's a huge cave system below it, otherwise known as the Mammoth Cave System, which is actually, they say it's in Kentucky, but this cave system runs it's bigger than just Kentucky. The entrance to the cave is in Kentucky. I'm going to give you another interesting fact about the United States and how this could possibly tie in with these sightings. The United States put a law into effect that you cannot travel 1 mile below ground without a permit from the government of the United States. So if you wanted to go to the Hollow Earth, or you want to go in Mammoth Cave looking for the native Terran reptilians, you're not going to be able to do it. Yes, why do they ban people from going 1 mile below the surface? Think about that one. The big picture. I am going to read this, don't worry. I just didn't want to reread the case files. Except for some of the superficial and seemingly wild and anomalous subject matter contained across these episodes, and considering the overall data these reports convey, the one thing that sticks out repeatedly is the Ohio River and its connecting systems. If one were to actually go looking for signs or traces of such species, it would be a safe bet to say that the Ohio River system would be a great place to start. Since the expansiveness reaches of the Ohio River system would most likely impede any serious investigation in anything but a massive period of time, one only need perform a minimal guesstimation as to what potential territory could be a serious habitat candidate. Obviously this or these species utilize the Ohio River system in its entirety to move about or forage, as it were. It would also presuppose that they don't have much trouble breathing underwater for extended periods, or they manage to remain out of view for long periods in order to move about, or primarily restrict their movements to late at night when 99% of the human population is unconscious. Now, interestingly, Bigfoot is known to do that too. Bigfoot is primarily known by any serious investigator as being a quote-unquote nocturnal species. Like I said, they're always avoiding humans. Also, the largest portion of all these river systems rarely go anywhere near congested human habitation, though obviously the Cincinnati-Dayton areas alongside the Little Miami River do pose a slight problem for undetected travel purposes, most likely why such frequency occurs there. In understanding reptilian habitat and environmental requirements, it should be noted that most all reptiles remain out of direct sunlight until nightfall, when the surface temperatures are cooler. So to carry that line of thinking one step further, if there were many of these fairly large creatures about, then most likely they would try to remain in fairly large, cold, dark places for convenience and comfort's sake. I'm going to reiterate on here, the legend of vampires, that directly ties in with Alpha Draconian reptilians, and especially Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess I made the video about. She was also locked in a cell out of quote-unquote direct sunlight in her last years of her life. There's also the mythology around vampires not being able to go out in quote-unquote the sunlight. So I think there's some validity to that with the actual sunlight and the mythology around some of these reptilian species being native Terran and Alpha Draconian. Now the native Terrans, according to Lacerda, do have points that they come up to the surface, and they do it to sunbathe. So that's very interesting. A lot like lizards, they're cold-blooded, and the only way they can warm their body temperature is by baking out in the sun. However, Alpha Draconians don't do that. I don't think Alpha Draconians can be in direct sunlight. And again, that's tying in with the vampire mythology there. Usually, this mythology comes out of some strange, obscure truth, if you know what I mean. So the ideas of them coming up to the surface around this Ohio area, it's even backed up by Lacerda of all people. Earth does supply a few of these locations, so we must attempt to identify such candidates in relative proximity to the Ohio River that also reveal Ohio River system access. And again, Figure 11 is from a National Geographic plate of February 1977, again showing the centered Ohio River with Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. This figure also shows the forested lands, rivers, and a handful of national parks. There are even some specific and unique geological formational anomalies located within this range. For example, there are a number of expansive and proximity-based cave systems that are within the realm of the Ohio River Basin, Mammoth Cave, as well as subsequent attached waterway systems. Vast portions of the cave systems are actually related to the watershed due to the invasive nature of the geologic strata and the waterway environment. These cave systems run throughout all these closely related states and regions: Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and other areas located within the watershed. A large portion of the caves are deeply furrowed cave systems. In some of these study cases are theorized to connect deep below our currently identified geologic universe and our quaint subterranean mapping technology. The fact these caves appear as more than coincidental a connection to the Ohio River system methodology of movement could very well identify such habitat candidates. For further consideration, it is also very likely that there may be subterranean access or rimnation to the riverbeds at the surface from these cave systems that are yet as undiscovered. Given the geologic construct of these cave systems directly related to this river basin, all the river systems, as well as the vast age and unique variables that these cave systems present, show that there are in fact some considerable number of unknowns regarding these systems in terms of length, depth, branching systems, and long distance and deep connectivity between currently known independent subterranean systems. And after all, don't forget, reptiles can be sneaky. Coda and final thoughts. With all the foregoing information, it would be logical to put forward these concepts based on the connection between all and apparently unconnected event data. There seems to be literally dozens, if not possibly vast numbers of these creatures. The common basis of these specific incidences are directly tied to the Ohio River system. The relational location of reports led to unique locations that can be referred to as either quote-unquote a nest or simply potential common points of origin. I will not attempt here to venture a guess as to what they are, where or whence they came, or in fact they have been here all along. Now, in defense, what I teach about reptilians, yeah, me and Brian do agree on certain aspects, but again, I'm not going to, my own thoughts on where these native Terrans come from and stuff like that. Yes, I do get into that mythology. He's not going too much into that, but I agree. These are probably the native Terran reptilians that were spotted. And I'm going to end the video with a little mind-blowing thing about our quote-unquote expansion to the west also. And dealing with, for example, there are cave systems, like Lovelock Cave, I believe that was in Nevada or Arizona, that had giants in it. And they sealed off the entrance. We have a cave system in the Grand Canyon with Egyptian ruins in it. One of my theories is why, you know how mining was so prominent out in the Southwest during our expansion? Do you know what mining was a cover for? Blowing up cave systems they couldn't explain, that they didn't want to explain. Possibly some of these cave systems utilized by the native Terran reptilians, and they had to cover all that up too when they expanded out west in the United States. That's what I think the front was for a lot of the Southwest, and the mining that they said what fueled our expansion, the San Francisco 49ers, all the people running out for the gold, in California. And I believe that there's more going on behind that, because we know that they blew up the entrance to Lovelock Cave. In fact, it's an interesting video topic. I should make a video about Lovelock Cave. That cave supposedly had 14-foot tall red-haired giants in it. And these giants in Lovelock Cave they're almost, if anyone's heard the story of Marines in Afghanistan encountering a giant, it was kind of the same story, except it happened here in America one time. They just blew up the entrance to the cave. I think there's a few cave systems utilized by these quote-unquote native terrans that were sealed off from the public, and we're not even going to be able to find them. Quite possibly the one on the Ohio River Basin, because it would only make sense. We know that Mammoth Cave is too big for them to cover up, but like I said, you can't explore Mammoth Cave. They do give tours, you'll see the first part of the cave. They're not going to take you all the way to the Hollow Earth where the native terrans are. So, okay, but with the sightings of reptiles that have been reported globally, and not just the Ohio River area, it would lead one to think that the possibility exists there may be a vast array of cave networks throughout the world, which I agree on. I already talked about that. And that these cryptoids seem to move far and wide directly via connecting river systems, much like our present-day freeway infrastructure. One might even go so far as to hypothesize that a huge population of largely unknown and undocumented, dare one say, bipedal reptiles are literally running around out there just outside our field of view. Impossible, you say? Here's an item for that discussion. Since Swedish botanist Linnaeus published Systema Naturae, a system for classifying living things, in the mid-1700s, taxonomists have identified between 1.5 million and 1.75 million species, some 4,500 of them mammals. Many more species have yet to be named and described. Controversy surrounds the issue of how many unknown species may exist. And other ones they don't want to admit to exist, like Bigfoot. Currently, as of 1999, the general thoughts concerning yet unknown and identified species, okay, so he actually, 1999, he did write this in the 90s, would make a considerably interesting topic. The following graph depicts the ratio of known dark block to potentially unknown species. And to reiterate on this, in 2019, we have even more previously, quote-unquote, unknown species that have been classified since then. And remember that I always tell you that every time they find a new species, the names are always in Latin, just like all of our legal terms are in Latin. This has to deal with Rome, of all people. Based on these projections, it would be safe to guess that the unknown and so far undiscovered species are leading to the known numbers in most all areas. Humans as a species, though indigenous in our earthly designs, it's debatable, are still only one small piece of the bigger picture. We are not quite as well versed in our world as we would like to believe. Final note, just because you can't see something doesn't mean something's not out there. And he's got notes here at the end, Briano. Now, another document he sent me, this was additional anecdotes. Not to be pushing to the point too far afield, there were a couple of other neat little coincidences which appeared during this project, which I note here, though I will leave for others to formulate some opinion or deeper conjecture. I am simply throwing them out there as a mere anecdotal information and not implying anything specific. Two of the major river systems that flow into Ohio directly from the Ohio River are the Little Miami and southwestern corner of the state through Cincinnati, and north past east of Dayton and Scorto, leaving Portsmouth to the south, traversing due north to Columbus with its branches forking west in central southwestern Ohio. The next figure shows these two systems as well as some obvious points of interest that have been bracketed to show direct proximity to these waterways. Again, this is a mere coincidence. These locations are, in no particular order, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Mound City Group National Monument and Indian burial mounds, 7 caves, and the still not completely understood Serpent Mound in Pebbles, Ohio. Now, there's some interesting things here. We know that DUMBs, deep underground military bases like Area 51 that I went to, some of these places utilize ancient cave systems and they just refit them. So they don't actually have to dig all these underground caves for these DUMBs. Some of them they actually utilize ancient cave systems already. I want you to notice also, the Serpent Mound is in Pebbles, Ohio. Does anyone know where that name comes from, of all things? Do you remember the Flintstones? What was the little girl's name in that? It was Pebbles. They put some, and the reason I mentioned the Flintstones, they make a big mockery. They make a mockery of humans coexisting with dinosaurs, which we actually think is going on to this day in the Congo, of all places. This is mockery they put right in your face. And remember Barney and Fred were a member of a lodge? Yeah, they were Freemason. And they had a little green alien friend named Cosmo they would talk to. All that metaphoric stuff. And when the Flintstones first came out, it was like one of the first cartoon shows. And they did a lot of this mockery right in your face. And that's why I find it amazing that the Serpent Mound is near quote-unquote Pebbles. Remember Pebbles and Bam Bam? Ohio. I don't think they get these names by coincidence. And pretty interesting there. Another really good eye popper that I came across in looking over some historical maps of the United States may or not be at all related to this, but again is pure coincidence. Figure 13, dated 1931, shows portions of the travels that George Washington took down the Ohio River in or during that period from 1759 to 1774, prior to the Revolutionary War, presumably fostering the incident referred back to as Pontiac's Rebellion. If you will note, directly in the middle of the red box toward the end of Washington's Ohio River travel is another interesting landmark known as Point Pleasant, West Virginia. According to this map's legend, italics represent locations existent at that time Washington traveled. Non-idolized towns were built or renamed after Washington. Point Pleasant, if you remember, is located directly on the Ohio River. Just food for thought. Point Pleasant was also the place that Mothman was first sighted. And John Keel, actually, he's on my YouTube channel. If you search that video, I have the original Mothman lectures from John Keel. And yes, they originally occurred in Point Pleasant. It's another interesting point there. And what was Washington doing there? So I think that this square, to end the video here, is the main point of interest to possibly where this underground entrance to the native terrains could have been. I honestly think that the original entrance probably would have been blocked off. They would have just ignited dynamite and said it was a landslide, or, you know, put boulders in front of it. Another way that they covered up a lot of cave systems, if you use logic, the building of our transportation systems in the United States, it required a lot of dynamite, a lot of moving earth and material. Look at highways like in California, where literally they blow the highway out of the side of a mountain. Well, what do they do with all that rock after they're done with it? Well, you can fill cave systems up with it, right? They've been covering up a lot of our history. And they still don't do a good job of it, because we still find serpent mounds in the middle of the woods. But whenever somebody finds one of them, the Smithsonian usually swoops down and steals the bones off you. So anyway, very interesting. And not really going to read anything from this. This was the Minion Project. It was an idea that he put together for a possible field trip and expedition to the area and points of interest. Now, me and Brian are both ex-military, and this is something we could easily do. Just saying that. You want to be out in the middle of the woods looking for lizards. You want to be me and Brian. We're both ex-military. We know what we're doing. So, hope you found that of interest. So, the Ohio River Valley. Another possible entrance to an underground, quote-unquote, ancient city of reptilians. Any questions or comments, leave them below. I'd like to thank Brian O for giving me his material and allowing me to read that. I'll give you links to his, if you're interested in watching his Book of Man series on Vimeo. I'll put that link in the description. The only link I can't put in the description is the actual documents I just read, because I was given them expressly by him. I don't have the authority to release them to anyone else, so please don't ask me to email them to you or whatever. I'm not going to be able to do it. So, but anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Any questions or comments, leave them below. And if anyone wants to take a field trip with Kenny and go look for lizards in Ohio, let me know. We'll make a class trip up. Until we speak again, this is Kinninigan, and take care.